Well, good afternoon, everyone. The H1B guy here, and today it's the H1B Guy Live with my good friend Sophie Alcorn from Alcorn Immigration Law. And we'll be discussing the H1B Lottery, H1B Reform, and a lot more circling around H1B Entrepreneurship. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and like this video so that I can continue to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention the H1B Guy offers a variety of consulting services, and I help businesses and individuals solve complex work authorization issues in the recruitment process while bringing awareness to employment-based immigration benefits. If I can help you, please reach out. I'd love to hear how, and you can check me out via the h1bguy.com. Today's post and today's video is brought to you by Syndesis. They are the ideal plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. If you're facing an H-1B denial or OPT expiration, don't get caught off guard. Make sure you have a plan B, and Syndesis is your answer. Well, today, as I mentioned, I have the privilege to welcome in Sophie Alcorn, who founded Alcorn Immigration Law back in 2015. And is a Silicon Valley immigration firm, but also with offices in Texas and New York. Over the last year, Sophie has appeared on several national news outlets discussing high-skilled immigration and also those that possess extraordinary ability. She's the author of Ask Sophie, the Founder's Guide to Visas and Green Cards, which released in September 2023. She was featured in Ask Sophie column on TechCrunch going back to 2019, is the host of the Sophie Alcorn podcast, which is now over 200 plus episodes. And shameless plug, I had the privilege of being on episode 129. So Sophie, how you doing today? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing great, Rob. It's so great to be here with you again. Thank you very much for having me back. It's always fun to have these conversations.
Crazy. It's we have a tradition going now, as I mentioned to you a couple of days ago, 3 years running. So we'll do our best to continue to circle back in 365. But a lot's changed since we last spoke here on the channel. A lot of reform has happened. A lot of fees and prices have increased. Filing and legal fees as well. But I'm just curious, and maybe like a 60 seconds Cliff Notes. What have you been up to in the last year?
Oh my God, so busy. I mean, first the election happened, and that was huge for everybody and continues to be. And it completely changed the immigration landscape when President Trump started re-campaigning around Thanksgiving of 2023. It just completely shifted everything, even though we hadn't had the election and he hadn't been elected. And then obviously there's been even more changes post-election. And now that we're actually into the administration, we're at Alcorn Immigration Law. We're currently helping lots of clients navigate this upcoming H1B fiscal year 2026 lottery season. We're providing a lot of guidance on H1B reform. And I know we're going to talk about that today, along with best practices for entrepreneurs. And just, I'm a founder and lawyer, but operator. And so just continuously trying to improve our law firm services to better serve our clients.
Yeah, I love it. And as you know, anytime someone asks me, I always refer them to Alcorn Law. Attention to detail and customer service, as well as experience and knowledge on your team is really second to none. And so just really love watching the work that you and your team does, and really excited about what you've had going on over the last year, and look, navigating the current political climate is always challenging, and having a legal expert like you and your team in our corner, I will say, and others that I know's corner is an extremely valuable service. And so let's jump into the H1B lottery. As we know, USCIS put it out a couple of weeks ago, March 7th. Which is a Friday at noon. I thought was a pretty interesting decision for them to kick it off on a Friday.
They're like, please work over the weekend.
Yeah, yeah, right. Saturday for sure is what that sounds like to me.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
and
maybe
then
they
from
want to like make sure that it's gonna go off without a hitch. So maybe they're hoping for low usage in the first 3 days just to test it. But
yeah,
they've been doing this for a few years, so
yeah. The
I don't know what.
electronic system, I think, goes back to March 2020, right?
Yeah.
Really, in the height of the pandemic was when it was
Okay.
first rolled out. Um, and it's going to run through March 24th this year, which is a Monday. I think
Right.
that's been fairly common, although I believe the last couple of years there's been some system issues which have allowed
Right.
them to extend the time. I'm always curious on that. They do have a bit of a buffer, but I think when I look at it from an expectation perspective, I would imagine that by the end of that week, that March 31st ish,
Yes.
I would say that Friday, Saturday, petitioners should begin to receive notifications of those that were selected, would
They
be
seem
my
to do
guess.
it at night and over the weekend for whatever
Yeah,
reason
yeah,
also.
yeah.
Um, they're supposed to complete the electronic registration process in March so that if, let's say, weirdly only like 20,000 people applied, then they could release it to normal petitions being filed based on paper in April. So
Mm,
I think since 2020, we've always gotten the notifications within the month of March. So hopefully
yeah.
that'll happen again this
Yeah,
year.
if I were to look into my crystal ball, Sophie, from an employer perspective, I
Yeah.
think I would expect that Friday or Saturday, right before the end of the month, knowing that
Mhm.
April 1st would be the date that they'd begin accepting applications, electronic applications. I'm assuming that would run for, another 90 days through the end of June. So
Yeah.
we're starting to see some historical evidence that these time frames have become fairly consistent now over the last, I'll say, 4 to 5 years. Um, but there have been a few changes implemented. First, I think the biggest is the fee increase.
Yeah.
So
So
ten
pretty big
dollars
multiple.
to 215, I believe,
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
registration. What are you
Yeah.
hearing on that? Is demand still high for your clients and your customer base on
Yeah.
the pallet
Our
for that registration fee?
So that's a really interesting question because um, we're sort of a confusing economy, but there's so many signs of growth and competition in certain subsectors that my firm represents. So, for example, highly specialized roles like laboratories for building robots,
Mm,
where they need like the world's best robotics engineers, like
mhm,
mechanical engineers plus computer science background. Like there's a job shortage. They can't find people. They're going to be sponsoring people in the
mhm,
lottery, right? But that's not the same for every single job. Um, and and I think overall, there's two things going on in the mainstream media that affect companies' willingness to hire. So one of them is uh, all the immigration stuff in the news. If you're a
yeah,
new company that's never sponsored an H1B before, you might not just it might just not occur to you that you'd like to get involved in immigration this year in particular based on reading the
mhm,
news, right?
mhm,
But on the other hand, there's starting to be some signs of economic stimulation and growth in the economy,
mhm,
which is also causing this to be a requirement. And then also with tariffs, that's like another interesting
mhm,
economic factor that's going to be affecting foreign companies, soft
mhm,
landing into the US and expanding here. So it's really unpredictable,
mhm,
but I think it's going to be roughly similar to last year. I think these factors kind of balance each other out. That's what I'm
mhm,
thinking right now.
mhm.
Maybe.
Well, and I think for me, I always go back to the revenue generating mechanism that the registration is,
Yeah.
non-refundable fee. And
I mean,
even
USCIS
increasing
has
it to
got to pay for those adjudicators.
215,000, a couple of 100,000, and we're looking at 8-9 million in revenue just based on a registration fee for USCIS, which is substantial.
It is.
But I agree with you.
I don't think the increase, even though it's like a 20x multiple or whatever, I don't think that the $200 increase really affects my clients though.
No.
It's like, oh, okay, I won't take my employee out to dinner. You know?
It's just additional burden, and the cost of the employee is really what it comes down to. And I've speculated in the past when they were looking at increasing the fee that even if they moved it up to 1,000 per registration, I think that there would be more of a resistance towards that. But I still believe that the talent acquisition piece, the talent shortages that exist, still unemployment hovering around 4%. You look at the jobs reports that have been anywhere between 170,000 to 200,000 plus on the monthly reports. Clearly, demand is still there. That's shifting, to your point on robotics, as we've seen in my staffing world. Prompt engineering, AI, machine learning, data science. The software engineer is really morphing now into these roles where the demand is changing, and while the role is similar, they just look a little bit different. But really interesting to hear that. The other thing that I noticed for some changes, they're still using the beneficiary centric approach, which is tying it back to the individual passport. It still gives the candidate, the beneficiary, if we will, an option. And that option is they can have multiple employers, register them, but then they get to choose who they want to work for or have apply for their H1. Do you foresee any changes in this process as we move forward?
I don't think anybody was happy when they realized that some beneficiaries were getting 50 to 80 job offers from different companies who were sponsoring them.
Yeah.
And those technically did not violate the law, but everybody got really mad at how unfair it was. And it turned out you only needed like 6 registrations to be guaranteed a selection, but nobody knew, right? And then they discovered that a bunch of companies were colluding and all entering the same set of applicants over and over again. So people got upset. I don't think they're going to change it back to that system. No. I think it's going to be one person, one chance. And you just got to pick your company that's going to do it. And then you're committing to that company if you get selected. You can always transfer later.
Again, they still have options. I just think you're not going to see the 10 anymore. You may see 1 or 2 register for the individual, but it's still based on
each person can only get one company to register them, or else they could be completely disqualified. So if anybody's thinking about having more than one company sponsor them, don't. Just one company.
Very good guidance. And maintain some loyalty, I guess, in terms of the company that does confirm they've registered you.
And we had several early stage startups get burned by that. They would go out of their way to sponsor people who would then just immediately quit when they got selected elsewhere. And it was the small and medium-sized businesses invest a lot into making this happen for people, and they're often unfamiliar with the process, and it really left a bad taste in their mouth when that happened. So
I think that was one of the electronic registration rollout. That was one of the pieces that I don't think was fully thought through. And after a couple of years of the very high volume and multiple registrations, they had really no choice.
Yeah.
The other change that I wanted to ask you about, last year we saw the implementation of organizational accounts, which allowed representatives from employers as well as legal representatives like Alcorn Immigration Law to have access within the same organizational account. Has there been any changes around that from an employer perspective?
I don't think there have been. They slightly improved it by making it easier for multiple paralegals to associate with multiple attorneys in a law firm.
Within the firm. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't think that affects what the companies are seeing. I think that remains mostly similar. Actually, let's just check it out. On Yeah, because the major update was February 28, 2024 when they announced that. So it's been roughly the same since then.
Okay. The last question I had around this was the electronic application for new initial H1Bs. In terms of the adoption on the petitioner side, on the employer side, are you seeing that be the preference now from your clients, or from what you're hearing out there, versus the old, multiple signatures on hard copy paper?
Yes,
FedExing
Rob. Come
overnight.
on. Of course. Who liked that? We killed hundreds of trees, or hundreds of millions of trees. There were, FedEx courier packages up the wazoo. It was the mountains of paper. It's like, where's the attorney? You're stuck in a mountain of filings. And then getting all the employers to sign all those in real life by coming to the office. It was a mess. All the paper checks. This is so much better. And they're moving towards more.
You shipped it to me, then I shipped it to you. Then you have to send it back to me.
Oh, it's so complicated. Why did we do that? Yeah.
Okay.
I remember it reminds me of being a young lawyer in 2008, and I think that's when like DocuSign was starting to gain popularity. And I'm like, this is so stupid. A whole company just around signing documents. All you do is print it out and FedEx it to them, and they sign it and they FedEx it back. Why is this so hard? And now I see the utility of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's its own word, right? You need to DocuSign it. It's like Google in the document management world. They definitely have a corner on that market for sure. Well, let's do our annual predictions then, in terms of total number of registrations, and we'll just say unique here, meaning one individual. What are you thinking for fiscal year 2026? We had 475,000 approximately last year.
I'm of two minds. I'm like, is it going to be 300 or is it going to be 500? But I think I'm more likely to say 500. But I feel like we're living in like multiple realities at the same time.
Right. It's so funny that the two numbers that you dropped, like I literally have had 400,000 or so in my mind. I think it's going to be somewhere around that again. I don't
think it's going back up to 800 because those were all like duplicates.
Yeah, we're not going to see that, but still, when you talk about uniques and 400,000 plus uniques and demand on 85,000 approximately, give or take, still is very low odds, roughly 1 in, we'll say 20-ish, depending on how you qualify. The value of H1B visas continues to remain at an all-time high.
Well, no, wait, not 1 in 20, not 1 in 20, because there's 85,000, and if we're dividing that by 500,000, we're looking about like 15 to 25%, depending on somebody who has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree from the U.S.
Yeah, still very low odds, right? At the end, it's very low odds. I mean, I think the advanced degree gives you the highest probability, just because it's the 20,000 plus the 65. I get asked that a lot, which again, I think demand will remain high. We'll track it, and we'll circle back. Last year, we were a lot closer than we were the year before. So I'm confident we're on the right track for this year.
I don't think anybody saw that coming with the 800 plus. Yeah. That was insane.
Absolutely insane.
And I guess the one thing is, like, the Earth's population is growing. So demand will increase even if supply stays the same over time on average, you know?
The Earth's population is growing, but birth rates in the U.S. are declining, which I thought is an interesting.
All the more reason to increase the number of H1Bs people.
And I think kind of to that point, this leads into our reform conversation. And for several years now, I've talked about this concept of the H1B EAD, and for me, and I think this is one of the things during the campaign that President Trump did hit on, which was, work authorizations for U.S. master's graduates, advanced degree
Mhm.
grads.
Mhm.
And I would love to see more momentum being built there, because when we look at the number of international students that come to the U.S. and earn U.S. advanced degrees, and then end up having to self-deport for a variety of reasons,
Yeah.
we are losing out on a large percentage of a younger workforce.
Yeah.
And it's something, when you look at declining birth rates and our aging workforce, the data doesn't lie. We can go back and forth between it. But um, I think that over the next, to me, 18 or so months, I think we are going to see some reform surrounding H1B. I don't know if it's going to be, a pathway to employment authorization documents or not, but I do believe that there are going to be some modifications to the system, because I think there's really two factions to this, Sophie, from where I sit. There is the faction that says we don't need to increase the number of H1B visas until we address the green card backlog. And then
Mhm.
there are employers and startups and tech organizations and Fortune 500s that say we need access to more talent. And
Right.
so there is this like give and take on both sides of the equation that um, it's hard to believe that 4 years of the previous administration went by and there really wasn't anything done to address some of the talent gaps, from the H1B perspective or from work authorization perspectives. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if you were to
Really,
look.
the Biden. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm curious if you were to look into your crystal ball and, say this is what I believe is going to happen, in the next couple of years. What do you foresee in terms of, I'd say, positive reform is really how I would
Oh,
want to word it.
okay. I'm hopeful, actually, so I'm happy to share that. Yeah, and it was good that the Biden administration got us out of the COVID mess and got a lot of processing times back up to normal. That was really useful. Of course, we'd have been hoping for some sort of positive, immigration legislation, but maybe that's more likely to happen in Republican administrations, perhaps.
Mm,
So, but one of the things that I noticed reading the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 plan
mhm,
was that basically the plan that is unfolding right now in Washington is step one, arrest criminals who
mhm,
are immigrants who are here and deport them,
mhm,
and potentially arrest undocumented people who are not criminals. But basically, step one is deal with immigration violators.
mm,
Uh, Step two of the Heritage Foundation's 2025 Project 2025 plan was or is fix the immigration system to let in really smart people to help move the
mhm,
economy forward. And then step three is, let them in.
mhm,
So it's a very painful process to watch everything that's happening right now.
mhm.
Um, President Obama tried to do something similar. He deported more people than any other president previously in history.
Yep.
And he was hoping to lay the groundwork for immigration reform, but it never
Mhm,
happened. So,
mhm,
um, but I don't think that, whereas President Obama, spent his political capital on healthcare reform and never made it to immigration, I feel like there's just a lot more um, this administration has a very different set of priorities on how much they care about what other people think.
mhm,
So if immigration is reform is on their agenda, is probably going to happen one way or another. They're talking about like one big beautiful bill or whatever, and they're talking about like, are we just going to fund the border? So
mhm,
depending on where that all lands, there could be some immediate immigration stuff. Yeah, it was amazing when President Trump went on the All In podcast in summer of 2024 and said, oh yeah, let's like staple a green card to every community college degree. If they work hard, if they're smart, let's let them in. So I don't know how much the base will go for that, but I thought it was great that he's now aligned with that, because it marked a huge shift from the 1.0 administration. But that would be amazing. I mean, even if like, I would be so happy even if if you get a STEM master's or PhD from a US university, then you can self-petition an uncapped green card. Like, even that would be incredible. It would be amazing. So there's like a lot of medium things they could do along the way that would make dramatic improvements. I want a startup visa that's real. There's so many more things they can do, but I'm actually more hopeful that in this administration than the prior one, that some positive immigration news might ultimately come out of it for employers and job seekers and the economy.
Yeah, I think it feels a little different than it did in 2016 for me, just as I really look back into it. I think during his first campaign in 2015, there was a lot of discussions around merit-based points, merit-based point system, which we really, there was a piece of legislation that was in the Judiciary Committee from Senator Cotton in Arkansas that was a merit-based points proposal that really never went anywhere. And then towards the end of the first administration, we saw a lot of very, critical and really hampering type executive orders and actions that were put in place that ended up being rescinded, that were really targeting, H1B visas working for staffing firms, third-party work sites. We saw a lot of that, and I think there's been a lot of fear that could potentially be.
Well, but that's where we have this political difference now of, is it just the people in the White House who are running the internal policy and the staff, or is it now this new crop of advisors coming from Silicon Valley, many of whom are immigrants, first or second generation, who did the whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps, become a mega billionaire. And they have tremendous influence, especially around AI and technology and entrepreneurship and economic growth. So now, for the first time, there's this counterbalance, because President Trump had pretty good rhetoric on his first campaign trail about yeah, we need workers. But then after, the people who were supporting him kind of took hold on like staffing and consulting and all of that. And then, of course, with the Muslim ban and got everything, all the COVID bans, immigration just got like completely shut down. So, but they're not doing that this time. Like, then we had extreme vetting, now it's maximum vetting. Then we had Buy American, Hire American. So far, no equivalent has been announced. And like, we're sort of all just waiting to see if anything else will happen. But like, so far, H1Bs seem normal. Processing might be getting a little bit more stringent. There's people are having airport and border issues, but fundamentally the pathways seem to remain open. And even the President Trump's executive order on AI, replacing President Biden's executive order on AI, says, hey, we need the best people here building AI. And that includes both in big tech and small tech, they called it. And Vice President Vance's speech in, I think, Paris last week about AI was also, really about how we need the world's best and brightest people on these shores building these technologies of the future, so America can continue to lead in the world. So in some sense, it's really like not even a partisan issue. It's just math. It's like, hey, you want to be the best? Let's get the best people to play for your team.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that, because when I look at the talent shortages as it exists in the tech staffing world, I look at the demand, I look at the increased cost of acquisition, not just
Mhm.
of work authorization acquisition, but acquisition, candidate talent acquisition.
Mm.
Those costs continue to rise. You alluded to AI in the tech industry, and in the recruiting industry has seen a lot of startups and a lot of startup acquisition. And a lot of those companies have utilized international talent. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a pipeline that is only going to continue to grow as the demand grows, as we continue to innovate. And that's something that, we look at the leading edge or the bleeding edge that we've been on, and we think about, a lot of the world has caught up to us in terms of innovation. And I think we can point that back to some of our very restrictive immigration laws, archaic, if you will, now 35 years in the making, some of the laws that still exist to this day. But I think you've also, you mentioned it's a partisan issue, but we've seen division amongst the parties too, in terms of how they feel about it. And I think that's because, to me, Sophie, when I have these conversations, the average American um, groups illegal immigration with legal high skilled immigration and sort of the
Oh yeah.
same issue,
Yeah, and
unfortunately.
and people just think like, well, just get in line, go through the system, not having any idea how horrifically Byzantine and backlogged it is.
Yeah.
So it's like impossible. It's almost impossible. It's a miracle that we get people through this system.
Yeah. And the joke is that they think that these individuals go to the DMV to get their documents, and they
Oh my
don't.
gosh. Oh my
It's like,
gosh.
that's not how that works. They're
Oh my
not renewing
god.
their license at the
Oh my
DMV. They're not
gosh.
renewing their visa, excuse me, at the
I
DMV.
wish that would be
Yeah.
so much easier. My
Um,
god.
Sophie, I am confident that some reform is going to happen. I think you really spelled it out, though, in terms of, the Heritage Project and their 2025
Yeah.
mapping that out. That
Yeah.
the focus is on undocumented, illegal, at least for the time being. And I think as we move through, this administration's first year, I am confident that in the back half of the year we're going to see at least a little bit more conversation around some of the high skilled immigration reform.
I
Um,
hope so.
but hearing you say that you're feeling positive about it absolutely makes me feel much better about it. I will admit that here,
Great.
because I think there's been times where you and I have talked, and I don't think you felt as
Yeah. No, no, no. It wasn't even like a real possibility before. But I think, I mean, President Reagan was Republican. He did amnesty, and nobody wants amnesty right now. But that was the biggest, immigration reform of its time. George W. Bush post 9/11 got big immigration changes through,
mhm.
not the pro worker ones he wanted, but others. And I just think we're overdue, and the political climate is shifting in a lot of ways, and so it might actually be possible now. And it might be that the big comprehensive immigration reform concept of the past is just not going to happen, but maybe there's piecemeal incremental improvements to the system that we think should be cool.
Well, we could talk about this for a lot longer and speculate a lot more. I'm sure
Yeah.
on it. I wanted to move into H1B entrepreneurship,
Oh
and
yeah.
I know this is something you've covered a lot. You've got several publications and done a lot of webinars around the subject from an education perspective.
I love it. It's one of my favorite things.
It's one of the most frequent questions I get is, how can I be an entrepreneur, or how can I be a majority owner on H1B visa? And you've got some really good reference points on your website. And I think one of the things that I always come back to is, there used to be the 5149, which is now gone. That isn't the case anymore, which is a really positive
Really
change.
exciting.
But
Yeah.
there's been a lot of changes in this space, I'd say, over the last 12 to 18 months. So my first question is, if I am currently on an H1B visa, working in a full-time role, and I wanted to start my own organization, what are the first couple of steps that you would advise me to take?
Okay, so first of all, call me because it's
Hello
complicated.
at
Yes,
alcorn.law. I got
yes,
it. Yeah.
yes. Second, I can help you better to figure out how to navigate this if you have a very clear idea of what your business is going to do. Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a startup? Is it a traditional business? Is it going to have investment? Is it going to already have customers lined up from the get-go? We need to show how it's going to have money to pay you to do a job that's professional. So, if you have an H1B as a software engineer and you're thinking about owning a restaurant, well, it's probably not going to be the best setup for an H1B because, does your restaurant really have the need for a software engineer? Probably not. But maybe if you're building kitchens as a service with some new app, like maybe we can tie it in. But it has to make logical, common sense that this is a real legit business and a real legit business need. Because the fundamentals of an H1B are there's a company that has the ability to pay, there's a job that is that involves a specialty occupation, and there's a candidate who meets the educational and experience requirements to be able to do that job. And so once you do that, you can get a 3-year H1B. But we've been able to get H1Bs for startups, for consulting companies, for just services firms. There's all sorts of businesses that can qualify. And the other main thing to figure out before you do anything is we have to navigate the process in such a way that you are not working before this new H1B is approved. And so that's one of the really tricky parts, because somebody's temptation would be like, okay, I'll just start an LLC and I'll just start getting clients and then I'll file my H1B. But I would really urge you to be cautious, because if you're on an H1B for a main employer right now, you're not work authorized elsewhere. So then the question becomes, what's the definition of employment or unauthorized employment? And it's really like this is my paraphrasing of the law, and attorneys have different opinions on this as well, because the case law is from the 60s when a tailor went on a ship to get measurements of customers and bring his measurements back to China where they were going to sew the suits and send them back to the US. Or so it's really old, right? So pre-internet for sure. The way I think of the definition of work in immigration law for this purpose is if you're doing any services or activities for current payment or for hope of future payment, that's a no-no. So if you're going to get a job in another company, you're not allowed to volunteer with them before you start and for them to give you a sign-on bonus to compensate you for your current volunteer activities. No go, that would be work and it's unauthorized. So we just have to be really careful with the timing and the setup, because I think it's fine to brainstorm, conduct user interviews, chit chat with potential investors, all pre-incorporation. But then there's this very tight sequence of events that we have to execute to make sure that we set it up, we do the transfer, and then you work. We have all the pieces lined up, but you haven't worked without authorization. So it's a boom, boom, boom thing. But one of the reasons I really love it when we do it is because you can get a new 3-year concurrent H1B. And so if you get laid off from your day job, you don't go into a 60-day grace period. you're just authorized in H1B status on your other concurrent H1B, which is really great.
As long as there's the ability to pay, right? That's the.
Well, so I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, this company has to actually make money, and it has to be able to pay you. And the payment requirements come in once the H1B is approved. So if it gets approved and you don't pay yourself, that's really bad. And
you're out of status.
You have to withdraw the H1B. But assuming this business had investment from yourself alone, venture capital investors, or it had letters of intent from customers who were ready to go and hire you as soon as you can work, or people actually pay you for a product or service. Wow, fancy that. All of those things would be ways to be able to pay yourself, to have the funds to pay yourself legally during the H1B approval period.
It's interesting. One of the things you said, which I may have to walk back some of the advice I've given in the past, is if they have a clear understanding of what their product is, or service.
Well, I mean, and you don't have to, but like, how are you going to make sure you can make money?
Yeah.
Like, well, even if the plan is like, I am a startup founder, I'm going to get $50,000 from my uncles to give myself 6 months to figure it out and test different websites and how much money they can make, and then decide. Like, even that would be more clear than like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah. I always say a very clearly defined business plan is step one. Once they have that, and then they understand what their product is, working through it, to your point, I think the financials is the piece that I always really get caught up on when talking to individuals. And you alluded to it about investment funding and making sure that there's an ability to pay. Is there I don't want to say a specific number, but like a best practice from a financials perspective of, if I am a startup founder and I have my financials in order, and knowing how time sensitive certain steps in the process are, is there like a best practice for the financials for a specific period of time? Is it 6 months, 12 months that you would recommend?
Okay, so at the most extreme version of this, where you want to be as conservative as possible and mitigate every possible risk, then if your business only needed one employee for the entire 3-year petition, and you were gonna, I don't know, live in Atlanta, and you need to work full time and make $100,000 a year, and then you need overhead for payroll taxes and some administrative expenses, maybe the total cost of the business of your H1B is going to be $400,000. And so if you knew that you weren't going to get any customer money in those 3 years, but you were going to like work really hard prototyping something and setting it all up, and you had $400,000 in the bank account, then if we got an RFE, we would have the most defensible H1B case possible. In reality, most of my clients end up with $60,000 to $150,000 in their bank accounts before we proceed. And we have, knock on wood, rarely gotten RFEs. I did get an RFE once for a client whose business bank account had $8,000 in it, and I was able to win that H1B. So there's a lot of possibilities for how to do it. And in that particular case, it wasn't for the H1B was for an employee who was a software engineer, and the owner was a founder. And the owner had letters of intent from several enterprise customers saying, and so we were able to make the case that as soon as this person could get to work with the software deliverables on day one of their H1B, that would be revenue generating for the company. Would now be able to have income to continue paying. And you know what? In that case, USCIS approved that person's H1B for 1 year, but then we were able to easily get a 3-year extension because we were able to show.
Then they had the funding coming in, and were able to prove the demand and the ability to pay was greater than what they had in the account. That's interesting. I think if I am listening to what you're saying, the more you have in the account from a financials perspective, the better it is from a security perspective. And it also reading between those lines gives you a higher probability to get that full 3 years on the request. So I
Yeah,
think
if you have it, if you
yeah.
have it. But if it's like, oh my God, I can only get $81,000, should I apply? Probably. You know, if that's what you really want to do,
Yeah.
it'll probably work.
The answer is yes, if you have a very tight business plan with customers with intent,
Yeah,
or
if you're really
a
motivated
very
and focused.
defined
Yeah.
product and specialty occupations. So very complicated. I get asked it a lot, and I appreciate you shedding some light on it. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you know, having somebody like you as a legal representative is key for individuals who are absolutely looking to pursue this path. Do your research, but at some point you need an immigration attorney like Sophie in your corner that can help you, because as you've heard, there's just instances that are going to come up that are unique, and we've got to build a case around the why behind it. And so I think that's really the key, is that as long as it's justified and there are certain pieces in place, then it makes sense to pursue it.
And there's one additional update I'd like to add on this topic, if I can, Rob. The H1B modernization rule, which we alluded to a little bit, it came out in January 17th. There is a new requirement that makes it explicitly 100% clear that 100% owners can be the beneficiaries of H1Bs at their startups. And the consequence is, if somebody owns over 51% or a controlling interest in their startup, or in their company, we have to disclose it on the H1B petition. And the initial the initial petition period will be 18 months instead of 36 months. So it's 2 18 months H1Bs followed by 3-year extensions after that.
So and I think, to me, when I really map this out in my mind, what is a perfect case scenario? It generally is for somebody that's working in a full-time role that has an approved I-140. Is that what I call step 2 of the green card process? And then it allows them to potentially run concurrent as an entrepreneur or owner. And work that through. It just gives, to me, additional layers of security and protections, as well as some longevity.
But if you don't, like, if you want to have like a consulting company or something, fine. But if you want to have the next $1 billion startup, there are additional considerations where if you were American, you wouldn't do your startup part-time when you're working at Google or Meta. You would quit, you would take a 6-month sabbatical, you would invent something over a weekend, and then you would announce it as a new company. But you wouldn't do it at night, while you're still working, because there's a risk that your current company, depending on their employment documents that you signed when you got your job, could lay claim to your
proprietary information.
So there's also that aspect. But I love helping entrepreneurs. This is super fun. And then the other time we do these is in the H1B lottery for students who would rather be entrepreneurs than employees. And also global founders who would like to move here to start their businesses for the first time. We can put them in the H1B lottery. And we can also get cap exempt H1Bs now for people to work in private companies, including their own startups. So if you had the money, you could start your own business, get yourself an H1B, no lottery, move here, have an 18-month initial H1B, and then extend it and self-sponsor for a green card. And you could do that at any time of year. So it's really cool to be innovating at the edges of immigration and really unlock a lot of new possibilities.
And are you doing those cap exempts with like foundations like Open Avenues or something like that?
Yeah, we've done a number of those over the years. We've had a high level of success. There are new possibilities as well under the H1B modernization rule that I'm starting to explore to potentially give people more opportunities as well. Nothing concrete there to announce yet, but we're absolutely able to help with those as well.
OPT and STEM OPT to H1B entrepreneur owner is a very interesting path that I've
Yeah,
not given a lot of thought to.
we do a lot of
I think it's an aha
this.
moment for me in this conversation that I really want to explore further, and I'm
Cool.
curious, as you continue to do those, where you're seeing the success.
Yeah.
I want to be cognizant of the time we have remaining. There was a
Okay.
couple questions that came in.
Great.
Would love to answer those and then close it out at
Okay.
the top of the hour. So one question that came in was, how do you see the reverting of the Dropbox interview waiver to 12 months from 48 months impacting the H1B program?
Yeah. I have no idea. It just happened, and some of my clients are trying to figure out what their options are now. I don't know if it will overall affect demand for H1Bs. I think it's there's what is it, an inelastic demand in economics. So I don't know that it will actually impact people's desire to get H1Bs, but it might limit how many people travel, and more people might be stuck here, and more people might want EB1As, for example.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Another one was, how do you see USCIS in practice handling the new expansion of self-sponsorship of H1Bs, which is, I think, what we're really just talking about.
It is too early to tell. The rule came into effect 30 days ago. Theoretically, the Trump administration could try to undo the H1B modernization rule, but it would take a lot of time and effort because it was put in there in a pretty strong way by the Biden administration. So I think for now we just have to assume it's business as usual. And we're seeing an uptick in demand for these, and I'm gonna keep on top of trends as it unfolds more.
And it's interesting you say that, because I think a lot of people jump to the assumption that with second term of the Trump administration, we'd see a decrease in approval percentages, because we saw really high historic numbers, and then a little bit of a dip kind of towards the end of the Biden administration. So I think it's too soon to tell on this, but it definitely is something that I know I'll be monitoring as well as you. What do we mean with expanding talented visas for AI and ML when the O1 already exists?
Interesting question. Well, the O1 is a visa for extraordinary ability, and you have to be at the very top of your field or subfield in a country or in the world to qualify. And it's very rigorous. And there are many brilliant people who, coming out of college or who never went to college, who are the world's top experts in these emerging fields. And so by having visa standards that require a huge body of work of past accomplishments, we're potentially handicapping ourselves by not welcoming the best and brightest people. So I think with any immigration policy, it depends on what the country's goals are, but there's a lot of different goals that a lot of different people have. But generally, if you had a very specific goal, there would probably be many more effective ways to have an immigration policy that supported it than what we have now.
Yeah, and look, you and I could spend another 20 minutes talking about O1s and the benefits, but also the difficulty in obtaining it and qualifying for it, right? But I think it's a great question. And I think we've seen a lot of folks asking about O1s really over the last, I'll say, 12 to 18 months. To me, it's become, one of the visa types that I'm asked a lot about, and it's one of the most complicated.
O1s and EB1As are a major part of our practice at Alcorn Immigration Law.
Yeah, and again, that's another reason, as I'll say hello at alcorn.law is where to drop those questions and set up some time. I got one more question, and then I'm going to close this out here. But I think this is a good one. How does a self-sponsor H1B who is also the owner of the company not fall into level 4 as 49% of the time they are the CEO?
Well, RK, we have lots of different ways of putting an H1B together. And if you are a client, we will very in minute detail review details of your H1B, your desired role, the job duty description, the location, the levels, your education, and we try to give our clients options for how the H1B is structured to make sure it's accessible to them. So there are options.
Highest probability for success, I think, is the key there, and
Yeah,
using those options to your advantage.
Within your budget and timing. So.
Mm-hmm. There was a question around the visa bulletin. I'll just say this, Sophie. It's something I follow closely. I think, as we've seen in the change in the Department of State, and how they've handled it, really moved to more of a quarterly approach is what we've seen over the last couple of years. Although this past month for March, we saw some pretty forward movement in EB2 and 3 categories for final action dates. But when I look at the overall numbers and I look at what's available for this year, and there is some spillover, but I don't see it really having a very significant impact. I think we're going to see the filing dates really hold probably till towards the end of the fiscal year. And I think we'll see the final action dates that exist across a lot of these categories creep up. But EB4 is a category I don't really cover a lot, but there was over 500 days of retrogression across EB4 for March. Sophie, I don't know if you knew that or not.
No,
I
I
know
don't
it's
do
not a category you probably deal a lot with, but
we do EB1s, EB2s.
But
perms.
that tells me that unfortunately, number usage and demand isn't meeting the availability. When we go back to the cap that exists on the 140,000 and the percentages that are allocated, I don't foresee anytime soon there being a lot of forward movement. I think we're going to be in this phase of there will be some aggressive quarterly movement and then maybe some incremental 1 to 2 weeks during those off months, if you will, of the quarterly movement. And unless availability changes, demand still remains very high. I think we're going to be kind of in this very incremental phase. And I think that just isn't a great thing for employers. It's not a great thing for the individuals, and definitely, not a great thing for renewals and fees and everything associated with that. But I still am confident that there will be some sort of, as you alluded to, a big bill, comprehensive immigration reform. We've been talking about it for several years now, and I still am confident that hopefully in the next 4 years we'll see something that addresses a lot of what's been in place for, as I mentioned, over 35 years. So look, I wanted to just I've mentioned it a few times, but Alcorn.law, there's an about section. You can also email at hello@alcorn.law. There is a chat bot on the site that is awesome too. You can actually chat with Sophie. I don't know if any of you.
No, it's not me. It's not me. It's our chat bot. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Again, check out the podcast. I mean, 215, 16 episodes now, Sophie. It's pretty crazy. Think about all the people that you've interviewed in that time.
It's been so fun. We've had congressmen, like rocket scientists. I did a bunch of stuff in 2024 on space immigration. Now I think I'm going to start looking at robotics. It's fun.
Yeah, it's in my listings. I appreciate you helping keeping me informed and up to date so that I can spread the word to others. Of course, follow you you're on all the social channels. You have a YouTube channel that posts a lot of your webinars and how-tos and helps. Highly recommend subscribing to that if you haven't already. As I mentioned, Instagram, Twitter, there's Alcorn Law. There's Sophie has her own, so find her on LinkedIn. A lot of great content on LinkedIn that is specifically focused towards employers. So I know a lot of folks that I referred that follow you and get a lot of value out of your content that your team puts out. They put out great stuff on your behalf. You got a great team and a great support team behind you, and a great marketing team. So again, that's hello at Alcorn Law. Please reach out to Sophie and let her know that the H1B guy sent you. I just wanted to say thank you. Getting an hour of your time is very, very awesome for me. And I just really appreciate you coming on and your willingness and openness to have these conversations that we've had. I love
Rob,
the positivity and the growth mindset that you have for 2025. I will echo that. We're seeing it in the staffing space. So just really excited about what's to come.
You're making my cheeks hurt from smiling, but it's an honor to be on your show, and I love chatting with you. Our discussions are always super fun, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for getting all this information out into the world and helping so many people.
Awesome. And of course, notes in the description if you want to contact and follow Sophie. I have everything that is linked there. Just wanted to remind everyone that today's stream was brought to you by Syndesis, the ideal plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. If you are facing an H1B denial or OPT expiration, don't get caught off guard. Make sure you have a plan B, and Syndesis is your answer. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube, click the bell for notifications so you're notified anytime we go live like we have here today on February 18th, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video and listen to Sophie and I catch up on all things related to H1B visas. So Sophie, same time, same place, 365 days from now. Deal?
I'll see you then. Thank you, Rob.
I'm Robert, the H1B guy, your global source for all things H1B.